When you listen to politicians speak, when you poll the people on what they believe, it is becoming increasingly clear that facts aren't worth what they used to be, that logic is kind of an obstacle that people feel like they should just avoid at this point. And I want to understand this process better. And so I'm very excited to welcome to the show now William Davies, author of Nervous States, Democracy and the Decline of Reason. William, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Very glad to have you here. So in your book, you address the sort of growing lack of respect for expertise and logic and whether a thing that someone believes is true or not. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How bad is the situation we find ourselves in?
Well, I think what I try to do is not simply to blame this situation on the presence of liars in politics. I know that there are lots of liars in politics right now. We have our own problems in Britain, and I know you have your own particularly extreme problems in the United States. But what I'm trying to do partly is to look at what is the status of experts in public life and try to. Sorry, my picture. And try to understand why do we put faith in politics, in experts in the first place. And I think there are various things that have undermined the status of economists and statisticians in politics over recent years. For one thing, I think that inequality in our economy means that lots of people are having experiences that are simply not captured in headline indicators that many liberals have placed far too much trust in over recent years, such as, the unemployment rate is falling, the gross domestic product is rising, and so on. But I think that, we also live in a time where control over the media has obviously become far less, has really sort of fractured in the age of the internet. So conspiracy theorists and those who are spreading, so-called fake news and conspiracies and so on have far more opportunities in order to undermine experts and objective facts.
I could not agree more. That has certainly been my experience. You actually begin the book with a sort of example of this overall process that you're talking about. And it starts just moments into Donald Trump's presidency. Can you describe that for us?
Well, I was interested in this whole dispute about the size of his crowd, which, it was kind of very telling in a way that, the Trump presidency began immediately with an argument about the size of this crowd, the number of people at his inauguration ceremony. And what I was interested in was that, first of all, why did it matter to Trump so much? Well, in a sense, Trump was claiming that this was a sort of demonstration, not really of a sort of piece of factual evidence, but a sort of surge of love that he believed people had for him. And it was extremely important to him what the size of it was. But the other thing which I think interested me, and I think this tells us something about the kind of fix that politics is in right now, is that really there are no authoritative measures of crowd size. It was perfectly clear from the aerial photography and so on that it was half the size of the Obama inauguration of 2012 or whatever it might be. But we live in a time where numbers themselves no longer seem to be able to settle arguments to the same extent. We have similar problems going on in relation to Brexit right now, and this idea that politicians can the numbers will settle political arguments is, I think, something which is really kind of in serious trouble at the moment.
And so obviously, I wish that we had time to go through it, but your book is also a sort of historical analysis of going back centuries of how we got to where we are, what sort of set the stage. And so I guess, one important topic, I guess, would be, do you have any advice on what we can actually do? And by that, I mean people who might be watching this video, regular people sort of existing in the American political context or in other countries, or for me as a member of the media who discusses politics and news, Sure. What can we do, if anything, to fight back against this trend?
Well, one of the things that I argue in the book is that it's no good blaming people for being emotional. People have always been emotional, and politics has always been a space in which people can be partly swayed by their feelings, by sentiments, and so on. And questions about propaganda and spin and so on, these are not new problems in politics. I think one of the problems we have right now is that this cycle of politics, particularly led by the media, has accelerated to the point that in some ways people have no choice but to trust their their instincts a lot of the time. And I think that in some ways, this is why Trump is such a kind of an appropriate politician for our times, in that he breaks through this complete blizzard of data and narrative and information the whole time, with his outrage, with his lies, whatever it might be. But he has a kind of provides a focal point for the media. And of course, I know it's easier said than done, but one of the things that I think the media needs to try and do is to kind of try to set its own pace to a greater extent and not allow itself to be constantly distracted by the latest lie, the latest scandal, and so on. And I mean, this is something that I think many journalists in the United States have been trying to say. It's a very difficult thing to do. But I think one way or another, we have to try and slow things down in the way in which we analyze things. And we also need to kind of make a virtue of the slowness of facts. One of the problems that facts have in the public domain is that facts and fact checking is always slower than outrage and this era of kind of fast data streams, big data, and so on. But in some ways, I think there are domains where I think it's very interesting, where trust is very high in public life and in politics, particularly around the medical profession. If you look at surveys of trust in experts around the world, there's one type of expertise that still retains very high levels of trust, and that's doctors and nurses. People blame insurance companies, they blame policymakers, they blame journalists, that trust in all these institutions is fragmenting. But people still look to those who they think can provide a kind of careful, slow, thoughtful and sympathetic consideration of their needs. And I think that a lot of people are looking for a type of politics that potentially can put a stop to this sort of constant stream of data and outrage. But I mean, obviously that's potentially an optimistic take on it. But I think that there's no alternative, because if you get into this perpetual cycle of outrage and quick fire reaction, then I think it benefits the right ultimately.
Well, I will, as a member of the media, I will attempt to keep that in mind. William Davies, thank you for joining us, author of Nervous States, Democracy and the Decline of Reason. Everyone should take a look at it. I think that there's quite a bit that we can learn that's very appropriate to the time that we find ourselves in. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, bye-bye.
Thank you very much for watching this clip from The Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.